The walls are closing in. This time, Trump is finished. This is his Watergate moment. This time, he's gone too far. Just kidding. Libs are losing their minds. None of that is true, but there's another impeachment hearing today. We'll get to that coming up. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Last night, I was taking a break from working on the book that I'm tentatively calling Crush the Commies, but I don't think that's actually going to be the title. But you'll find out the title eventually. It's coming. I got a draft due. Draft's got to be in full draft before Christmas. I was writing, taking a moment to think about life and the world. I turned on the TV. I don't know, maybe it was 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. And 7 o'clock at night, I guess it was. And this hearing had been going on still for, what was it, 11 plus hours? Sitting there, I was like, who thought that this was a good idea? I mean, this is absurd. Asking a million questions about an unimportant event that didn't even happen, that nobody should care about, and liberals have somehow convinced themselves this is where Trump supporters are going to flee him. This is where independents will come over to their side, and maybe even Republican senators will vote to remove him from office. These people have completely lost their minds. Did you order the quid pro quo? Remember that with Colonel Nathan R. Jessup, United States Marine Corps, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Remember that guy? The whole moment where he's asked, did you order the code red? And that's the build-up in the whole movie. It's a very watchable movie, even though it's really not that interesting if you think about the storyline. But anyway, it's okay. I've watched it many times. Did you order the quid pro quo? That is the question that I suppose we're dealing with now, even though before we get into the thick of this, before we get down into the weeds, let's keep in mind, what have I been telling you all along? I don't care if there was a quid pro quo. Investigating the 2016 election, Ukraine shenanigans, Biden and Burisma is all legitimate for the president to request. I do not care. I don't know how else to. There is no statutory infringement here. If they don't like how the president of the United States uses his powers and his constitutional authority, that's what elections are for. That's not what impeachment is for. There is no abuse here just because they don't like the thing that he asked about. That's not an abuse, right? But here we are, being told that this is the moment that it all turns around. This is the incident that we look at and we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, I simply can't handle supporting this president anymore because of what I think maybe an ambassador said to another ambassador who heard from a guy who worked at the NSC, who talked to his brother, who talked to a lawyer, who talked to the whistleblower, that Trump wanted an investigation of Burisma and Hunter Biden. Oh, no. So what? I sit here and I ask from the beginning, we can argue about whether there was a quid pro quo and how it's even possible to be upset over a quid pro quo when nothing happened. The aid was not taken away from Ukraine. They got the money, and there was no investigation started of the Bidens. So what are we talking about even with? But that goes deeper. That really plays the game from their side of the field, and I don't particularly want to do that. Notice how they've gone back to quid pro quo because bribery didn't work. That was what they were trying, bribery. And before that, it was an abuse of power. And before that, it was a campaign finance violation. And after that, it was a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, according to the Ninth Circuit of Appeals. I don't know. Changing it every day. If you have a real case to make against somebody, you don't change the charge every day. Well, today this is polling better, so we'll just say this thing. Tomorrow that one might be polling better, so we'll say that thing. You have more testimony today. Ambassador Sondland, I was watching it this morning. The guy actually kind of reminds me of the insurance salesman from Groundhog Day. Ned Ryerson? Oh, hey, buddy. He bought whole life, blah, 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 health insurance from me. Remember from Groundhog Day where Bill Murray hugs the guy? Ned Ryerson. Anyway, Sondland just kind of reminds me of that actor. Very good comedic actor, by the way. That guy was fantastic in that role. So, all right, we got this Sondland guy. Let's dig into this together because, folks, it's wall to wall. The journos are all fired up about this. They think this really matters so much. They really want to talk about it. Okay, so I think this is going to go on for like another 12 hours today. I mean, it was endless yesterday. And then we'll get into some other components of this narrative, also some other things to talk about. There's a Democratic debate tonight. I don't know if anybody really cares, but there's a Democrat debate tonight. Mayor Pete is surging. Maybe Mayor Pete is the Democrat savior that they have been waiting for, at least in terms of their primary campaign. Mayor Pete's way up in New Hampshire, way up in Iowa. I've been telling you all along it's not going to be Biden. Just like I've been telling you all along, it doesn't matter if there's a quid pro quo. Stick with the buckster. We don't have to do a lot of corrections here on this show. We don't have to, I was way Samsonite. I was way off. So, Sondland. Let's get to what he has to say. This is all about whether the storyline today they want you to take away from this. I'm going to distill down for you, and this is, I hope, one of the reasons why you listen to this show. I will distill down for you everything that is said over, that has been said today and was said yesterday over the course of Lord knows how many hours of testimony into the very simple narratives that Democrats are then going to try to force feed, try to ram down the throats of the American public to bring about the outcome of at least a change in public opinion that will politically disadvantage Trump going into re-election, and maybe in their wildest dreams perhaps get some Republicans in the Senate to start to go along with the possibility of removal. But I don't think, it's just not going to happen. I think the Democrats have never really even thought about what the implications would be if they removed Trump in that manner after the leveraging and the manipulation of the deep state and all the dishonesty, not just from the media, but from very senior Obama appointees trying to get an investigation and successfully getting an investigation of the president going based on lies, based on the abuse of power that was seen there. If they managed to remove Trump from office, I would lose all faith in the American political system. And a lot of us who really do believe in this country, the Constitution, would very quickly understand this place to be under direct threat, that the institutions that we have grown up with and that we have defended, and in some cases for many of you defended with your lives by serving the armed forces, that they are corrupted and perhaps corrupted beyond repair. Democrats are so shrill, they shriek so loudly with their hatred of Trump, they don't seem to understand what the implications would be of getting what they want if they really remove this president based on this, based on a phone call that a lot of people heard, and we'll get into this, didn't think was a big deal, and based on a policy dispute that didn't lead to anything. And what they really believe that we'll just go, that things will return to normal after that? I think that's one of the fundamental fallacies that the left indulges for itself, is that they'll be able to pretend this whole Trump thing never happened. And we're going to go back to a point where the elite media, the libs, the Democrats could just sort of pat people on the heads and say, this is the way the system is. This is the way the system in our government works. And a lot of Republicans, of course, going along with them. There's a lot of machine GOP that needs to be swept away. But then that brings me to the storyline today, the one thing they're trying to get everybody to believe or to hear so many times that it will influence and affect their judgment and that it will change minds about the President of the United States. Did everybody know, Mulvaney and Pompeo and, well, at least everybody in Trump's inner circle, because we had a lot of testimony yesterday from senior NSC guys. I will say Volker and this other guy, Morrison, they're square away dudes. They kind of remind me of some of the individuals that I worked with at the CIA in terms of their demeanor, in terms of their approach to their jobs, in that they were really spot on. They really know their brief. I thought they were impressive under that pressure, and you weren't really aware of what their politics were I forget the name, but the aide to Pence yesterday, I don't think that she showed up as a. We know who the partisans are, right? We know who the partisans are in this whole process. I mean, Vindman, and I love seeing yesterday, you had on Twitter Rob O'Neill, who's a Fox contributor guy I know a bit, and has never been shy on the Twitter, just saying, all you need to know about Vindman, you found out when he insisted on being called lieutenant colonel. People who serve, they don't flex like that because they don't have to, unless they're trying to prove something, trying to do something a little weird. So I thought that was a noteworthy incident. But we know who the partisans are, and we know who the people are who are just showing up and telling what they know about this. And the fact that Adam Schiff presides over all of this tells you really all you have to know about the legitimacy and the decency and the fairness of the proceeding, which is that there is none. But okay, you're supposed to believe that Mulvaney knew, that Pompeo knew, that everybody knew that the president had drawn a line in the sand about an investigation, getting dirt on his political opponents. That's what they always say, which I would note is a distortion, an intentional distortion of what is even said in the phone call, on the phone call in question. Can you find out about what happened here? I've heard bad things is not the same as manufacture lies about my opponent so that I can feed them to the press. That is what the Democrats did, by the way, with the dossier paid for by the DNC, using foreign sources, running it to the FISA court, corrupting the top of the DOJ and the FBI under Obama. So they already know all about that. They know how to do that. But that's not what happened here. They keep saying, get dirt on your political opponent. Is there dirt? Are they taking it as already established that there must be? So the only reason you'd ask for dirt is if there is dirt. So I guess the Biden situation in Ukraine is perhaps shadier than they've been willing to admit up to this point. That's an interesting admission that I don't think they intended. They keep saying this, though. Oh, get dirt on the opponent. There's nothing wrong. And I will not veer from this. Nothing will change my mind about this because it's so obvious when you think about it. There's nothing wrong with requesting a look from a foreign counterpart at what happened in the 2016 election. There are active DOJ investigations right now about that matter. The Democrats, all they could talk about for over 2 years was that, but they were in control of that and they knew it. They had Weissman, their little attack guy, going after Trump with all of his little Democrats. So they were fine with investigations then. But now the shoe is on the other foot. Now the other side maybe gets to take a look under the hood and see what's going on. Okay. But we're told that there was a quid pro quo, that the president's top advisors all knew about this, and that is Sondland's position. Except there's one problem with that, as he is saying. Listen, look, Sondland is this is another example of maybe we shouldn't appoint ambassadors based on how much money they raise for presidents, but that is what ends up happening. This guy was ambassador to the EU. He's a hotelier, and he is a Trump appointee who raised money for Trump. So Trump doesn't appoint the best people. Never going to change my mind on that. Trump does not have the best people. You don't hear him say that anymore because he doesn't. He does not have good instincts about human beings. It's just reality. Good instincts about politics. Good instincts about fighting back against the opposition. But when it comes to picking the best people, I mean, I'm sitting here and my White House press secretary, Trumpster, you're missing out. But here's the problem with Sondland's point of view on all this. Please, producer Mark, would you play 26 from this morning's hearing?
Do you have any reason to doubt Ambassador Taylor's testimony, which he said was based on his meticulous contemporaneous notes?
President Trump never told me directly that the aid was conditioned on the meetings. The only thing we got directly from Giuliani was that the Burisma in 2016 elections were conditioned on the White House meeting. The aid was my own personal, guess based, again, on your analogy, 2 + 2 = 4.
So you didn't talk to President Trump when Ambassador Taylor says that's what you told him? Is that your testimony here?
My testimony is I never heard from President Trump that aid was conditioned on an announcement of elections.
So you never heard those specific words.
Correct.
Right? But
Never heard those words.
So the president draws, we are to believe, just follow this through, just apply logic, forget about it. Occam's razor, my man, just go to it this way. The president draws this line in the sand. You must do these investigations. You must. But nobody is ever told this in a meaningful and straightforward way. Nobody in his policy chain of command seems to remember the president saying that this must happen or else. Maybe he said he wanted them to investigate. Maybe it was important. But the whole thing here's the quid pro quo. Nobody remembers being told this. And somehow the investigations didn't happen. And there were no consequences from the investigations not happening. So if this was a quid pro quo, it was the worst one anyone has ever come up with in history. And this is why you can't believe the narrative that they're trying to feed you on this one. You can't believe the story they're telling you. Don't be a quid pro quo schmo. Don't listen to the fake news on this.
I'll remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that our first president, George Washington, directed his own diplomatic channels to secure a treaty with Great Britain. If my Democratic colleagues were around in 1794, they'd probably want to impeach him too.
Yep, they probably would. This is something that is left out of the feverish media coverage. Oh my gosh, Trump and the abuse of power and all over St. Biden. They're going to do this. Guy, I think he's 78 years old today, by the way, and not going to be their primary victor. But the president can appoint people to act on his behalf in foreign policy. Presidents have done this, as Devin Nunes pointed out. But you don't hear that. There's always this talk of the unofficial channel. So Rudy Giuliani is skulking around in corners and just, wringing his hands and just, how can I undermine policy? He's a policy emissary of the President of the United States. The president's allowed to do that. The president's allowed to conduct secret diplomacy. He's allowed to have people doing diplomacy on his behalf. The president's allowed to do this, folks. Media doesn't want to tell you that. But as predictable as night follows day, the banner on CNN, witness implicates Trump. Oh my gosh. Implicates him in what? Ask that question. What is the crime? What is there an anti-quid pro quo statute? Because all foreign policy is based on quid pro quos all the time. Their entire case hinges on whether or not the public understands the request. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't enforced. The request for a look from a foreign counterpart into issues of concern to this country, including 2016 and whether there was corruption going on in Ukraine and whether that corruption directly touched on the Biden relationship in Ukraine. Is that a legitimate request or not? I'm here to tell you it is a legitimate request. Do not listen to what they are trying to feed you. Oh my gosh. Getting dirt on his opponent. Is that what he said? Did Trump say, hey, can you guys just give me something? Have one of your guys write up a memo about how Hunter Biden took a duffel bag full of cash under the table to tell his dad not to to get the prosecutor fired or whatever it was. No. He said, I've heard bad things. Can you look into this and get us some answers on this situation? Now, CrowdStrike, the Ukrainian server situation, that is perhaps not as strong a case. That's not territory that is quite as valid for this. But the 2016 election in Ukraine overall is very valid, my friends, and I will get into why. I'm going to pose this question to you, and I will return to it in a moment, but and Byron York, who is he's just this understated, steady hand in writing about this and covering this issue, he lets his writing, he lets his thoughts do the talking for him. He's not a lot of bluster. He's not running around calling people out. He's just like, what about this? How about that? Anyone want to take a look at this? And he's very, very consistently, I think, insightful on these matters of not just impeachment, but Russia collusion and all the rest of it. I mean, there's a whole crew. Andy McCarthy, Byron York, Molly Hemingway. I mean, these people have been correct on this all along, which I think should matter. And CNN and MSNBC keep putting these people on TV who are like, oh my gosh, any day now, the walls are closing in. Oh, no, false. It's not true. It wasn't happening. But it was, I suppose, good for ratings at the time. But I would want to take you to a piece that Byron has written where he goes through, what if Trump is right about Ukraine? Now, just hold that thought for a minute, because I have to get a little more of this testimony today and what they're saying. Oh, the quid pro quo. They're back to this now because it sounds shady. And I do think that the White House and the Republicans have made a rhetorical mistake by saying there was no quid pro quo. Mick Mulvaney was actually right, but it was counter the narrative the White House was putting out at the time. He was right when he said that quid pro quos happen all the time in foreign policy. I mean, the way he said it wasn't excellent, but the truth is that Mick Mulvaney was more on target here, because quid pro quos are something that foreign policy doesn't just have. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It is central to how you do this. So if the president has a valid request or a valid national interest, or just a valid interest for the administration of and the executive branch of the United States government, he is allowed. There's nothing improper with him asking about that matter. There's nothing improper with him requesting more information or even an investigation from a counterpart about that. You must remember this, because they want you to forget all about that aspect of this debate and just skip right to, well, if he conditioned aid for the Ukrainians based on whether they would look into his political rivals. Did President Trump make Hunter Biden take $50,000 a month while Daddy was running foreign policy in Ukraine? No, he did not. Is that a legitimately shady and perhaps even corrupt arrangement? Yes, it is. Have far less credible and serious things been investigated ferociously by Democrats over the course of the 2-year special counsel, as well as everything else they've thrown at this president? Of course, look at the way they went after the Stormy Daniel hush money payments, which they were trying to say might have been a non-criminal campaign finance violation. That's what they're going to go with. It's mind-boggling. There is plenty of reason to look into whether there was a corrupt situation between the Bidens and Burisma in Ukraine. It is just reality. Everyone can pretend like no big deal, it's not illegal. Well, it's a big deal because it is unethical. It was gross. That's established. What happened was gross. Hunter Biden is an imbecile. He was getting paid $50,000 a month because of who Daddy was, because Daddy had a lot of power in your name. The daddy, in this case, Joe Biden, was acting on behalf of the Obama administration, who was your president and my president at the time. He was acting on behalf of the American people, carrying that weight, carrying that power, and there was at least the appearance of corruption. So why can't we look into this and find out if there was more than that? How could we know if there was something explicitly illegal? Yes, a quid pro quo of corruption, unless we asked our counterparts and found out more about what was happening here. They just wave all of this away and tell you there's nothing to see here. Everything is fine. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, never have an error in judgment like that. Hunter Biden, the drug addict who got kicked out of the Naval Reserves as a public affairs officer within 6 months of getting his commission because of who his dad was, for failing a drug test for, I believe it was crack cocaine. That guy would never have an error of judgment that would implicate the vice president of the United States? No, of course not. How stupid do they think we really are? Well, unfortunately, quite stupid it seems, because at least today they believe they're winning. They're cheering. They think they finally got Trump. They're finally going to hammer this whole thing until we give up, and Trump is in real trouble. Here is part of what Sondland said this morning. Play 23, producer Mark.
Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret. Everyone was informed via email on July 19th, days before the presidential call. As I communicated to the team, I told President Zelensky in advance that assurances to run a fully transparent investigation and turn over every stone were necessary in his call with President Trump. On July 19th, in a WhatsApp message between Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Volker, and me, Ambassador Volker stated, "Had breakfast with Rudy this morning." That's Ambassador Volker and Rudy Giuliani. "Teeing up call with Yermak Monday." That's Senior Advisor Andrei Yermak. "Must have helped. Most important is for Zelensky to say that he will help investigation and address any specific personnel issues, if there are any."
None of that is illegitimate to me at all. Assuming that that's all true, which still seems a little bit hazy, but I'm not even arguing with the truth of it as a necessary defense of Trump. I'm just saying, even if all that is true, yeah, Ukraine's like the most corrupt country on planet Earth. The son of the vice president is getting $50,000 a month. There are prosecutors getting fired who are supposed to be rooting out corruption. There's all kinds of shenanigans, which I will get into, of Ukrainian government officials publicly, and this is on the record, speaking out against Trump during the election. But no investigations. All of a sudden, Democrats, investigations are kryptonite. The Democrats are vampires, and investigations are the sunlight coming out, catching on fire. What's wrong with finding out what happened here? I thought they loved finding out what happened. We just went through a 2.5-year-long special counsel debacle that in the end told us, maybe some stuff happened with the obstruction of the investigation, but really the investigation never needed to happen because there was no Trump-Russia collusion. Oh, that investigation was totally legitimate, totally necessary, though. It is not whataboutism to look at these issues and say, hold on a second, when you have this other concern, when there was another situation like this, did you apply the principle equally? Are Democrats applying principles and rule of law and expectations of government officials equally to both sides? If someone says yes, they're a moron. That's where we are. Clearly, the principle, the regulation, the interpretation, the ethical expectation is changing every day depending on, is this going to affect a Democrat or is this going to affect a Republican? Is Trump the person that's going to get in trouble because of this, or is somebody that we like as Democrats going to get in trouble because of this? And that's all that matters. Ambassador Taylor, in a WhatsApp message to Ambassador Sondland, Taylor, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Sondland, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. The president is trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt the transparency and reforms that President Zelensky promised during his campaign. I suggest we stop the back and forth by text if you still have concerns. I can recommend you give Lisa Kenna or S a call to discuss them directly. Thanks. So that's the Ambassador Sondland saying no quid. The president has said no quid pro quos. If a bunch of little confused bureaucrats running around in circles worried about, who's in charge of their portfolio and who has the direct ear of the president and who's pushing most effectively on foreign counterparts. I know how all these State Department people talk. circle the loop and circle back and close the loop and, all this stuff, all this bureaucratese they speak in all the time. If they were confused about the president's intentions, that's on them. And if Rudy Giuliani was running around throwing elbows and that ruffled some feathers and maybe some people got confused about what he wanted, or maybe Rudy went a little rogue. I like Rudy, but that's on him. Otherwise, I need someone to explain to me how something that would need to be as clear for it to have any impact as a quid pro quo, you do this or else. We have all these people talking about this, but there was no real establishment of what was supposed to be done, and there never was an or else. And even if those things were true, I sit here and I tell you, fine. He's the president of the United States. I keep hearing people say, well, the president was going against the interagency consensus. The president wasn't conducting the foreign policy of the United States. No, he is. When the president says this is the foreign policy of the United States, it is the foreign policy of the United States. That's what the libs and the deep staters and the mainstream media don't seem to understand. Just don't seem to get it.
But I believe I just asked him an open-ended question, Mr. Chairman. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories and this and that. What do you want? And it was a very short, abrupt conversation. He was not in a good mood. And he just said, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Something to that effect.
I want nothing. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. That's what the president, I know this president is mercurial, changes his mind a lot and everything else, but maybe there was just some confusion about what was real here. Maybe there was some confusion about whether what the president's real intentions were. Here is one of the problems we run into. Democrats, and you see this not just in this impeachment mess, but you see it in new legal jurisprudence that Democrats apply to this president and only to this president, where it no longer matters if what he did is strictly speaking within his power or legal or constitutional. They decide because they can see into his heart. They understand his intentions. They know who he really is on the inside. They decide that it is de facto illegitimate because Trump is doing it. A perfect example of this would be with the so-called Muslim ban. Turned out the Supreme Court said, yeah, you're allowed to ban people from these countries. That your president, the statute that Congress wrote that says you can do this, and you can just do it. It's up to the president's discretion. They don't think this president is allowed to have presidential discretion because they don't accept that he's really the president. That's what is also playing out through this whole debate over what was going on in Ukraine and what he said. And you see, even if the president is legally speaking, which he is, allowed to tell a foreign counterpart, hey, can you look into this issue? I want answers. That is the sum total of what action occurred. Can you look into the following thing? 2016, Burisma and Ukraine and the Bidens. He is completely legally entitled to do that. There is no legal prohibition against any of this. That, it would be bad for Joe Biden if it turned out that they found real corruption involving his son or something, doesn't mean that Trump doesn't have that authority anymore. Oh, but they just take it, the left and the libs take it to a special place where because Donald Trump is the one making the request, it is inherently illegitimate because he is bad, he is evil, orange man, bad and evil. That's all. Everything else is just trying to, put more adornments and baubles on the tree, so to speak, or just trying to add meat to the bone. I haven't used the word baubles in a long time. I don't know where that came from.